This morning's reading before the lesson comes from John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. That's John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.
In the passage that Miguel just read, Jesus is doing a lot of things. He's trying to express to the people who are listening and watching what's been going on here that he is and represents access to God. Not the Pharisees, not the false teachers, but Christ. He even makes a drastic statement that all who came before me are thieves and robbers. To make his point, he's using this analogy of a shepherd and of the sheepfold. Actually, first is the sheepfold. Next is, beginning in verse 11, is I am the good shepherd. So he's using the analogy of shepherding to get his point across. To get them to pay attention to how he is dealing with people. And really, if these people were the ones that they were to follow, then they should look more like this. This analogy of shepherding. This analogy of shepherding is used also in Scripture to talk about leadership in the church. One of the terms for the leader is shepherd. Three terms that are interchangeable: elder, shepherd, and bishop, I guess we could say. Those are more descriptive words. But the idea of shepherd is very prominent in regards to the leadership of God's people. And that is why I want to spend the next couple of weeks talking about shepherding. Primarily, and first off, to talk about the importance of shepherding in the home. But also to think about those of us who aspire to be leaders in the church. And when we aspire to be leaders, perhaps we already have a mindset of a leadership style already there. And the shepherding model is completely different from a lot of the models that you could otherwise choose from. Jesus begins really talking about about the sheepfold. This is a diagram of what an ancient sheepfold may have looked like. It's basically stones stacked upon each other to create an enclosure. And this is where the sheep would be taken at night. And notice that there's only one opening to this enclosure. And that's where Jesus says, He says, I am the door. I am the gate. Everyone else should not have access to the sheep. And if anyone does get access, they have to come through me. And Jesus is trying to get this idea across to the Pharisees, but He's also trying to get this idea across to those who are listening, that it is hard for us at times to identify the threats to the sheepfold. And the sheepfold could be, in the analogy of applying the idea of shepherding, it could be referring to the home. So the home should be this place of security. Or the church. The church should be this place of security, where the only thing that comes in has to come through Jesus. There are 4 principles to biblical shepherding that we will notice this morning, and over the next few weeks we'll unpack them a little bit more. Those 4 principles are on the screen. The principles of knowing, leading, protecting, and providing. Someone may ask the question, we get that the term shepherding is used to refer to leadership in the church, but there's no really specific reference to leadership in the home regarding shepherding. That analogy isn't necessarily applied there. But I think when we look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, and if you can turn over there real quick, 1 Timothy chapter 3. Paul makes the point there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Paul makes the point that the training ground for a good leader in the church is a leader in the home. 1 Timothy 3, verse 4. An overseer, I'm going to tap into what it says in verse 2. An overseer is one who manages his own household competently, having his children under control with all dignity. If anyone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of God's church? And I definitely see value in these 4 principles of shepherding. And they're valuable for anybody who assumes the leadership in a home, or who has that role of leadership in the home, of headship. In our society, there are many different descriptions of family. And so I don't want to get off into that. Some families only have one parent. So does that mean only the one parent is off the hook and that these principles won't work if it's just one parent, if it's just a mom, or if it's just a dad? No, these principles are valuable for any home. And I think any leadership. I've read some pretty interesting articles talking about this model for leadership in business. So I think it's very valuable. I think anyone who assumes a position of leadership needs to know what they're doing and who they're leading. They need to lead. They need to protect. And they need to provide. So we'll start with knowing. the principle of knowing, this first principle that the shepherd knows the sheep. John makes the point in recording the words of Jesus here, and he says in verse 3, the doorkeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. So there's this knowledge factor in regards to the shepherd knowing the sheep. Now, notice it doesn't say that the sheep necessarily know the shepherd, because that's not the point. The point is not followership here. The point is leadership here. And that if someone is going to be an effective leader, they are going to have to know who they are leading. It often causes conflicts in the home when parents don't know their kids. Now you could say, how could this be? There are a couple of examples of how we can intimately know our kids, closely know our kids. And there's a couple of ideas that have helped us. You may have heard the 5 love languages. All right. So if my love language is gift giving, then I'm probably going to relate to people by giving them gifts. But what if that isn't the love language of my wife or my kids? Then it doesn't mean giving them gifts is wrong, but it's not going to necessarily communicate love. They each have their own love language. It may be spending time together. It may be encouraging words. It may be doing something for my kids or for my wife. That means I have to know them. I have to know the unique things about them. If we use the temperament model that is connected to counseling, where there are 5 different temperaments, I guarantee you're going to have at least 2 temperaments to deal with in your kids. It might be yours, or it might be your spouse's. If I only relate to my kids through my temperament, and maybe sometimes you hear this particular story, someone who really loves football, and they really relate to that outgoing, smash 'em up sort of way to live. But what if your child doesn't identify with that? Maybe they're more quiet, the learning type, that. So am I now disappointed in my child because they don't like the same things I like, when temperament determines a lot of that stuff? And I have to know that. I have to know uniquely what they need and what makes up their personality and their temperament. There are several benefits that come for the shepherd when he knows the sheep. It makes his job or her job easier. The sheep will follow when they know the voice of the shepherd. And they know the voice of the shepherd because of the way that the shepherd has treated them. That voice is familiar. That voice is trustworthy. That voice is something that seems pleasant and something that they would want to follow. I suspect a sheep could be afraid of someone who was put in the role of shepherd, who didn't have a kind voice, who didn't have a gentle nature, who didn't seem like they were really a shepherd. As a matter of fact, they won't follow the stranger because they know, they can tell, they can sense. And don't think that's not true in the home. What do the sheep think about you? You could ask that phrase or that question in a number. What do your kids think about you? Leaders of this congregation, what do the members think about you? It's going to be through how you have demonstrated your knowledge of them by how you treat them, how you relate to them. Again, are you a trustworthy person? Or are you a person that seems like they're angry all the time? Are you a person who is accepting, or are you a person that I feel like I have to earn something in order to get your attention? See, those are things that are very important in a family. They're very important in a church family. And it starts with the shepherd knowing the sheep. Knowing what the individual needs, and also knowing what the whole family needs. Sometimes we can become too child-centered in our parenting. Or maybe since this child is more like me, then I am closer to this child than that child. That doesn't bring the flock together, it separates the flock. And that's one of the things that sometimes you see adults who feel like they have to be the center of attention. Where did that come from? That came from when they were in their family, they had to vie for attention. So once we understand the needs of the individuals, then we can understand and focus on the needs of the family together, because that's what it's all about. If you have a family, the family is what it's all about. And that means I'm going to have to gather knowledge. And I want to use this verse as a principle. 1 Peter chapter 3. And specifically, Peter puts a lot of responsibility on the husbands in the family. 1 Peter 3 verse 7 says, "Husbands, in the same way, live with your lives with an understanding of their weaker nature, yet showing them honor as co-heirs of the grace of life, so that your prayers will be hindered." Basically, he's saying that understand the needs of your wife. Understand who she is. Understand the things that bring joy to her. Understand the things that speak to her heart. And I find it interesting that this sort of statement is not, you don't find it, wives, live with your husbands according to knowledge, because sometimes they can be big jerks. We don't read that one. We don't find that particular verse in there. So there is from here anyways, from this passage, there's a responsibility that Peter gives to husbands to understand and know what helps their family, to know what helps the individual, so that you can respond appropriately to their needs. And that the voice that they hear is not a voice of condemnation or a voice of judgment or a voice of non-acceptance, or even worse, a voice of, I don't know what this person thinks about me. Anybody escape childhood with that sort of an idea rolling around in your... Do you even like me? Mom, Dad, do you even like me? What we know is going to determine what we say, our voice. And I think the idea that Jesus is pointing out when he uses the word voice is more than just words. It's more than just words. It's you. The second principle is leading. And that means that we are going to be the ones, the leader, setting the pace. Oftentimes we think about the aspect of just leading in righteousness, meaning I do the right thing. I live my life, I don't have bad habits, I don't do this, I don't do that. And that's all important in your example, because the things that you okay are the things that others around you will embrace. I had friends who drank and smoked. But you know where I learned how to drink and smoke? It was common practice in my house. So, barring something else influencing that in a different direction, that is oftentimes what we choose, the example that we see. So the example in righteousness is important as a leader in the family that's trying to honor God. But it's also example in tasks. If we expected our kids to do anything in our home, it was first demonstrated by us, by Lanita and I. We were the example in whatever needed to be done. We shared the tasks. And oftentimes you share tasks in order to impart technique, to impart skills. And after a time, the kids can do things on their own. There was a time where I was turning over the responsibility of mowing the lawn to Keegan. And you may say that wisdom failed me early on because we lived over here in the house, the big house there, that's our church office now, and there's a lot of grass. So we had a riding mower. And in teaching Keegan how to mow the lawn, we had a couple of mishaps. But he needed to learn this stuff, Mr. Granberg told me after one particular incident. And he said, they have to learn this stuff somehow. One of the things he did was he cut the corner too quick on the swing set. The back tire caught one of the poles on the swing set, and he didn't know necessarily what to do in this particular emergency. And so he kept going. He pulled the swing set out of the ground, drug it around the yard a couple of times, and then he stopped, and I could have become angry, but really, whose fault was that? That was my fault. He obviously wasn't prepared for this sort of machinery. But that didn't stop him. He still had one more good oopsie in him before he finally figured it out. And that was, he was going across the yard here in front of the little house there. He'd come out of the backyard, and I guess he maybe was going to turn around, and he hit our neighbor's car and put a little dent in it. It wasn't significant, but it cost a couple $100 to fix it, but he had to learn that. We worked together at first, and then I gave him the freedom to mow. And he made a couple of mistakes, but I can tell you for sure he doesn't run into swing sets anymore, and he doesn't run into people's car anymore with lawnmowers. I know it. I know he's got this one down. So we demonstrate. We are not only an example in good living, but also in the tasks. And I think that applies to anything. If we expect, as leaders, if we expect anything to take place wherever it is, we need to be willing to be the example in doing those tasks. At this point in the passage, verse 6, it says, Jesus gave them this illustration. So he's using the analogy of shepherding to get his point across, but they did not understand what he was telling them. In the passage that Miguel read, it talked about the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. And so I always ask the question, why didn't they understand what Jesus was telling them? And this is why this next principle is challenging. They didn't understand what Jesus was saying because they were invested in the system in the way it was. Basically, Jesus is telling who's ever listening to him at this point that you cannot trust these teachers because they're false teachers. They are misteaching the faith of Judaism, the Jewish faith. They're misteaching it. It was never supposed to be what the Pharisees had created. They didn't understand because they were the system. They were invested in the system. The system revolved around them. And if someone comes and criticizes your system, what are you going to do? You're either going to be defensive or you're not going to understand what they're talking about. Because to you, this is good. And that's why protecting can be a challenge. What are we protecting our children from? That can be kind of confusing, especially if we are invested too much in the system. Does that make sense? A lot of things that really are dangerous for all of us, we're not as careful as we need to be in filtering those things out. And so whatever I'm supposed to protect my flock from, I may not really understand because I'm too invested in the system that I really should be careful about. I want to give you an example. I'm going to go right into meddling right here. We're going to go right into it. And that is, I'm going to get back to, I'm actually going to go backwards in this outline that's on the screen. One of Satan's schemes involves either both of these elements, fear and exploitation, or one or the other. And I guess we could say Satan feels like he's in charge of stuff. Satan feels like he should be the one in charge of this world. He's got better ideas. If we understand some of the passages from the Old Testament, it's really pride. Satan's big problem is pride. And he wants what God wants for himself. But he didn't create the world. It's not his. But with the ways that he attacks humans, he does it in overt ways. But sometimes he does it in ways that seeks to override God's ownership. He kind of claims ownership of us. You want this, you need this, and I can provide it for you if you'll only bow down and worship me. Isn't that what he told Jesus? See, he claims ownership of stuff that doesn't belong to him. Those are his schemes. That's the way he operates. And what is his real goal? It says to steal, to kill, and destroy. That's his real goal. That's what this is all about. That's what we are protecting from. But if we're too invested in the system, then what we need to protect from, we may not see it as clearly as we need to. We may actually defend the system because we are so invested in it. I heard a news story a couple of days ago that got my attention. It was an interview with Sean Parker. Anybody know who Sean Parker is? That little guy said, I do. He is one of the early founders of Facebook. If some of you, this is probably like some of you guys are in your 30s. You guys remember Napster? Yeah. Well, Napster was his idea. Basically, he created an app that enabled people to steal stuff. Okay, that's Sean Parker. So now we have Sean Parker involved in Facebook. And in the interview, he was talking about what they were trying to accomplish. And it makes me nervous. Now, you always have to, let's see, what's the word? I have to package this. I'm not saying that Facebook is evil. Others may say that. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. Randy said, I'll say it. Okay. So I'm just going to share a couple of quotes from this interview. He said, the service literally changes your relationship with society. Is that a truism? And he said, as it relates to the influence of the service on children, he said, God only knows what we are doing to our children's brains. He said this. These are his words about his product. He said, Facebook's goal was to get and keep people's attention. The thought process that went into building these apps was, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? Now, what is the goal of Facebook? He said communication? No. Did someone say sell advertising? That's the goal of Facebook. He said, the attention that people give it is fueled by little dopamine hits every once in a while. So every time you like something, or every time someone likes something you put up there. Now, I get this. If you post something that you really like and think it's worthwhile, don't you keep looking back and you get the notifications that someone says they liked your thing? And I don't know, sometimes I'll say, wow, Lenita, I got like 25 likes on this. You ever say that? That's the dopamine hit. That makes me feel good. And you're going to get a notification if you're one of my friends, which means you're going to look at Facebook when you get that little ding, or you see the little reminder, you have 2 or 3 notifications. Oh, what? What are people saying? Correct me if I'm wrong. And he says, this little dopamine hit generates more content. And they called it a social validation feedback loop. And this is his, what he said about that. He said, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. See, that he's playing on that. They are playing on that. Now, that's their words. I'm not making this up. That's their words. He said, we understood consciously what we were doing, and we did it anyways. Basically, they knew they were creating an app that manipulated your emotions. Now, maybe you think that's good. I like that. And I think there's value to it. Someone said the purpose of Facebook is communication. That's definitely there, and that's definitely useful. Social media. That's good. But there are some other things that may be kind of dangerous. Basically saying we're trying to program people to pay attention to us. I think that's dangerous. I think that's a threat. I think that's one of the things, or an example of how difficult it can be to protect our kids and ourselves from the schemes of Satan. And then the final principle is providing. And there are two things that we understand about providing for our kids, providing for our family, and that sheep flourish when their basic needs are met. When they feel safe, that's one of the basic needs for kids. They need to feel safe. And if your sheepfold is not a place of safety and security, we need to think about how we're going about crafting that. Because we're doing something intentionally. We are creating a way that our house runs. We're doing that intentionally. And then it says that they will be safe. Jesus says, verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to kill and steal and destroy. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. Those are words that describe the providing that shepherds accomplish. And he puts it in terms of abundance. That there is a feeling of safety, and I realize that what I need, I'm going to have. And this idea of abundantly doesn't need to communicate the idea of catering to our selfish needs. It just simply means that I know I will have all that I need. And in a way that is deeply meaningful and important and significant in abundance. And what many parents have said is this. They've said that they've seen the attitude in their kids, when my needs are met, then I will help you meet your needs. Isn't that a basic principle of human interaction? If I've got my business taken care of, that frees me up to help you. But in a lot of families, the needs aren't met. The emotional needs, the safety needs, even sometimes physical needs are not met. And so people are going to find a way to meet those needs. Young people will find a way to meet those needs. That statement, if my needs are met, I will help you meet your needs, that's indicative of a family that's functioning properly. In our family, we cared about the individual needs, but not for the sake of the individual so much as it was for the family. We had a goal as a family. We had objectives as a family. And that's what a good shepherd is able to provide. Many reasons why Jesus would use the analogy of the shepherd. But the main thing is, and Jesus is trying to appeal to the people who are listening. He's trying to get them to make a decision between the voices of their world and His voice. And He uses the analogy of the shepherd because the shepherd is, it's a picture of gentleness, right? Don't we think about that when we think about shepherd? Kindness, gentleness, patient, all of these words. And that's what our kids deserve to find in the homes in which they're coming up. Leaders, shepherds, parents who are patient and gentle and kind. That's what we need in the church. We need leaders who are gentle and patient and kind. Just like a shepherd. Verse 19 brings the passage to a close. And really this passage begins in chapter 9. Verse 19 says, "And again a division took place among the Jews because of these words," because of what Jesus was saying. Because they didn't understand, because it went against what they were invested in. Many of them were saying, "He has a demon, he's crazy. Why do you listen to him?" Others were saying, "These aren't the words of someone who's demon-possessed. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" See, there's this decision that we all have to make. What we think about the words of Jesus. Are they the words of a kind, compassionate, patient leader? Or are they the words of a crazy man? And the benefits, and that's what Jesus is trying to tell them. The way shepherds operate, that's how I operate. And that is to your benefit. That's to all of ours benefit, the way Jesus operates, the way He accepts us, the way He leads us, the way He provides for us, the way He protects us. There's real value in that. And this morning I encourage you to dig deep into that and realize that the way Jesus leads you is to your benefit.